the long and short of wealth management. So that's the topic. And I'm Sankalp, and I take care of business development at PMS AIF World. And as most of you are familiar with what we do, but I'll still give a little bit of introduction to what we do. We're trying to, we stand for informed investing. And as you would notice, most of our efforts and all our sessions are focused and concentrated on that endeavor. In keeping in congruence with our rich tradition of investor centric approach, we are coming with a mid-year conclave on the 9th and 10th of July. And I think this is a good medium to extend a warm welcome to today's audience and to everybody listening on the call today and who will listen to this afterwards on YouTube. We are hosting the top investment managers confluence on the 9th and 10th of July. And this is going to be a show where we answer real questions. We provide relatable solutions, and we look at what is happening in the world of investments and what investors can expect. So now coming to today's show. So our guests are today Mr. Satish Menon, Mr. Vikas M. Sachdeva, and Mr. Sachin Shah. So Satish Menon is an industry veteran, although that word is often used too loosely in the industry today or very liberally in the world today. But Mr. Satish Menon is truly a veteran and has a lot of in-depth understanding and knowledge of the wealth management industry. Mr. Menon holds a BCom degree from University of Mumbai and is a qualified, cost and works accountant and a certified financial planner. He has been associated with Geojit Financial Services since 1999 and currently serves as the executive director, which he assumed the post he joined in 2011. He brings a lot of laurels, a lot of industry insight, and a lot of practical understanding to wealth management. Our co-hosts for the day are Mr. Vikas M. Sachdeva. He also himself is an industry.
Hello.
So he has worked across AMCs and headed teams across different time periods, different phases of evolution of the market, and is someone of great value to this show because he brings his anecdotes and his own witty charm to the show. He's also been a member of a few SEBI committees and AMFI committees as well. Accompanying him is fund manager at NK, Sachin Shah. He is been managing money for a while now, almost close to 2 decades, and he is the author, or he is made a framework called Equal of investing in companies, investing in businesses. So with that those introductions, let me introduce the last variable in today's equation. That's FinLearn Academy. And as you all know, the best question wins a prize from FinLearn Academy. So please keep sending us your questions. FinLearn Academy is one-stop solution for learning everything stock markets. And I am sure the past winners will vouch for the efficiency of the training. So over to you, Vikas. I think I have done my bit of introductions. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sankalpo. I think judging by the registrations and judging by the questions I've got through my DM, through my timeline, I think there's a lot of interest. Essentially, we'll be covering 3 parts. We'll talk about the broker-driven wealth management business in isolation, as well as NRIs and how they look at managing money. But before we get into that, I think as is customary, I'm going to talk to you about the guest as a person, the person behind the professional. And let me tell you, it's been extremely tough to find out about Satish because I keep getting just one simple thing. Satish, his superpower is that is unflappable. He doesn't lose his cool. He's very calm. He's very serene. I tried to find out from so many people कि Satish Menon को गुस्सा कब आता है और क्यों आता है, because somewhere it just got to me that there is something like, you see the Rahul Dravid ad, he's getting angry. कैसे गुस्सा नहीं आ सकता? But Satish, I must tell you that across the board, everybody talks in glowing terms about your ability to keep calm under the most stressful of situations. Okay, in fact, a lot of people go back a long way and say that not only have you helped them unconditionally, during the whole broking evolution which has happened, because you've been very helpful, A, and B, your knowledge of systems and processes at a fraternity level, at a capital markets level, is unparalleled. Yeah. Which makes me wonder why, if you can take so much of stress, then why you moved out of Bombay. You're one of the rare professionals I've seen who's moved out of Bombay. I think you moved to Cochin in 2013, right?
Yeah, that's right.
When I talk to Satish, he always tells me that this is one of the best decisions he's made. It's led him to believe that he's leading a much more calm, peaceful, and balanced life. He spends time with his lovely family, wife, and son. Satish, the other thing I've heard about you, two more things. You have an extremely sharp memory. Your colleagues are actually very wary of this because you remember decimal points in the presentation slide, which has been made 2 years ago. So they say that it sometimes gets very difficult to talk to Satish because he remembers everything. Last but not the least, this is something which made me smile. Satish is one guy who can hold his drink. Not that he drinks too much, not more than 2 pegs. But here's the fun part: he makes sure that everybody around him gets drunk. Okay, and they have their fill. So people said that very nicely about you. So this is Satish Menon as a person. I've known Satish for close to 3 decades now. We used to work together in a company a long time ago, and I have some very fond memories of my association with him. So Satish, let's just deep dive now and talk about you have basically seen the broking industry develop from very close quarters. One might say a vantage position. You've seen it evolve right in front of your very eyes. Take us through this entire evolution process. Having been there, done that, seen everything. How do you think things have changed? How do you think things have evolved?
So just a little bit before Satish, you begin, Vikas, I just asked a fun poll in how many recent web calls have we faced tech glitches. So just to, for the human part of it, for errors can happen, let me put to you the poll results. At least 60% said that they experienced glitches in 20 to 50% of the last 10 webinars. So let's just, set the context and begin. Glitches happen. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sankalp. So it makes me less guilty. Thank you. And thank you, Vikas, for those kind words. We have known each other for a long time now. So on the broking industry, phenomenal changes have happened in the last 3 decades. I had come to this industry somewhere in 1990. If I remember right, maybe August 1990. And the Sensex was around 1,000 odd levels. Today it is 54,000. So that is the kind of change I have seen. I don't know whether it proportionates to my weight. 53,000. So leave that apart. So I've seen huge changes as well as the appreciation in prices. So leave apart the appreciation in prices, which we will talk if some relevant question comes in. But because you would know that you have been in this industry for quite a long time. In those times, you had this trading for 2 hours, 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock. People used to go to the ring of the Bombay Stock Exchange and used to do buy and sell physically. So 12 to 2. After that, you had a party. So you work only for 2 hours in a day. So that went on till say 95, 96. BSE Sensex 1000. The volumes were hardly 200, 300 crores, even if I don't know whether it was that time. Today we are talking about 75,000 crores in the cash market, another 20 lakh crores in the F&O. Forget about that. The main problem that time was the physical shares and this physical trading. I don't think India would have reached this situation of so much kind of daily volume if 2 institutions were not there. One is NSE, which started this screen-based trading, and other is NSDL, which started this depository segment. Because of these 2 things, the Indian capital market changed rapidly, and the number of people participating in this market went up. Those years in 1990, we had 3 or 4 people going into the ring to buy and sell shares, and we had 30, 40 people in the back office to sort out the delivery problems. It was very less efficient. More people getting into maybe less productive work, and only 4 or 5 getting into productive work where we generate deals. Today, the things have changed. You have 10, 15 people doing the dealing portion, and maybe 1 or half of a person doing the back office. That is the biggest boon which India has got over the last 25 years, post NSE and NSDL combined. And that is why you see even in the remote part of this country, people are able to participate in the stock market. Of course, we had our ups and downs. Every year, we see some kind of, not every year, every decade, some kind of scams coming in, going up. People lose focus, people lose courage. All those things happen. But it is good to say that 1,000 Sensex of 1990 today is 53,000, which is 14% CAGR, excluding the dividends. So no matter what happens, no matter what kind of noise happens over what all wrong things are happening in this market, if you are a patient investor, you'll make money. So that is what how it has evolved over the last 30 years. And of course, many things are happening these days. Many things the regulator is trying to make it more stronger, more secure. And I think that is better for the investing community as a large.
Which, you mentioned about scam, you mentioned about every decade. Interestingly, one of the favorite topics people talk to me now, people who are uninitiated or less initiated in the stock markets, is this whole Scam 92 web series, which has caught fire. And it makes me wonder that whenever people talk about the stock market, people who don't really know the part of the stock market, they actually talk about the exceptions to the rule. Not the 1 to 53,000 Sensex, 1,000 to 53,000 Sensex, but they talk about scams which have affected. And the general feeling is that this is a gambling den and one should not enter even today. Do you think that there is a case for highlighting more of the positives of the stock market and then thereby having more people come in and liking broking products?
Let us rephrase this broking product to investment products.
Okay.
So that would be a better term.
Point taken.
Because when we joined this industry, when I joined in 1990, brokerage was a taboo. Somebody from good family do not get into broking. In Hindi, you used to call dalal. It was not something which a professional would go and join, because everybody thought that it's a satta bazaar, or for those in English, a gambling den. Okay, so there were some element that time. There are some element this time also, but the market has vastly improved. You had scams, 1992. I went through it, and let me tell you, after looking at the series, I can relate to certain people because we knew those people. It happened. You had a scam in 2001. So you had different scams, but a different type of scam, not the similar scam which happened earlier. So people are also innovative. No matter what happens, because these kind of incidents or episodes would be there in all industries.
True.
You cannot blatantly, because of one or two episodes, you cannot paint the whole industry as bad. Like I told you, 1,000 has become 53,000, which means people have made 14% CAGR. For what do you need? You don't need to get into scams for that. You don't need to buy. I don't want to name stocks, which in .com was this much and now in this much. No, you don't need to buy that. Even if you had bought the 30 top companies of India, you would have made 14% return. The scams come from the greed of the people. Okay, people lose not because there is a scam going, somebody has rigged up the price. All those things could happen, but that is a very, very limited element of people. Most of the people feel wrong about this industry is they think it is fully gambling. No, it is not. It is the best instrument to beat your inflation. It is the best instrument to meet your goals. Because today, investing in FD or similar kind of debt instrument doesn't even take care of inflation. So if you have a discipline, if you have the right way of investment, I think this is the best investment opportunities. Not only about the stock market, you can invest in mutual fund also. So the taboo, I think the time has come that people don't look at this brokerage industry as a bad industry. It is actually good. It actually fuels in money for the economy. When the market is good, many people come out with IPOs, production can go up, economy can go up, GDP can go up. So I think this is the barometer of the country in terms of economic indices, and we should look at it that way. Few elements here and there should not dampen the spirit of this industry.
I think that's very valid. So 2 points which you mentioned: don't talk brokerage, talk investment products. I think that's a very significant sort of difference which you talked about. Most people don't realize that. And second thing you mentioned about people losing money due to greed, not due to the markets. I think it's very well put. Sachin, I'm sure you're itching to ask some questions.
Sure. Yeah, it's been a nice discussion. Thank you, Satish. Thank you for being with us. Satish, one interesting thing as we are talking about how markets have evolved in the last since 1990 and now. But in the recent past, what we see is an emergence of technology-driven broking platforms, and of course they have attracted a swathe of new investors. In fact, I almost call them, they are like invisible investors as compared to the traditional broking houses like us, where we have a full-fledged service advisory and where we are daily in touch with our investors. This new technology platforms, broking platforms have a different set of investors. How are you seeing this space actually evolving?
So, Sachin, thank you. Yes, over the last 2-3 years, we have seen the technology-based company coming into the brokerage industry, and they have been able to attract traction in terms of new clients. And I understand from these new entrants that most of these new clients are of the young population, that is below 25, below 30 years of age.
The millennials.
Maybe after millennials. Also, it is a very good thing which is happening in India. Maybe 5 years back, the total number of individuals who used to trade in the stock market, when you look at NSE, once in a year, the number would have been, I don't know, maybe 30 lakhs, 40 lakhs. Okay? So on a population of 130-35 crores of India, that number was too small. Over the last 2-3 years, this number has exploded. And I will give thanks to this new technology kind of company where they have been able to attract new young people. Right now the number is close to 20 million, excluding the duplication. I think it is at least around 13 to 15 million. Of course, the number has grown 3 times over the last 4-5 years. But 15 million is still a very small percentage of the total population. These numbers, my feeling is, in the next 5 years can still double from here. So in a way, it is good. Earlier what used to happen is traditional brokers like us, we and you, used to get clients. Clients used to do some trades with us, get understanding of the market, and then go and do with active brokers for reduced rate. So we were actually the sourcing point through IPOs, and then maybe we were giving it to discount brokers, the so-called technology platform. I think today that trend has reversed, and I'm very happy about it. They are able to attract new clients to the market, and I'm sure over a period of time, people will realize that trading actively doesn't mean making money. Investing, keeping hold the shares for a longer term is where you actually make money. So in a way, it is good for the industry, but I still feel that industry still has a long way to go.
Satish, that's a great insight. I never thought of it like this, that they are actually acquiring customers, and finally the customer retention will happen with the guys who will actually provide value-added service. Fantastic. I think that's a fantastic, great insight. But an interesting point that you made, that these are largely very young guys, and they have just started earning, if you think about it, a large part of them, unless they have really had a inherited part of the wealth, but that will be a very small minority, right? So a large part of these guys have a small pool of money, I would like to believe. But when we talk about the real big boys, high net worth individuals, clients, right, and they all come to a firm like yours, right, who provide a full service or a full advisory kind of thing. And I must admit that actually a firm like yours definitely must be doing a great job. And why I say that, because when I see your numbers, I think the recent numbers when I saw, as a firm, you've probably done about 350 crores of top line and about 160 crores of PAT. Now that's a very, very decent profitability. And I believe you have a lot of, and your balance sheet is very strong, you have a lot of cash. But even if I have to adjust for some treasury income because of the cash, I would like to believe that your top line from the core business will be about 300 crores and a profit before tax of 100 crores. That's a very strong profitability. So the way I interpret is that obviously you are adding a lot of value to your customers, your HNIs. How do you do this, and what is the secret? Can you share some bit of it? And how do you see it going forward?
So Sachin, we have this motto, we have this mission vision. What we say, we exist to help clients make better return. That is our saying. We exist to make our clients make better return. If you are not able to do that, we don't need to be in this industry. So we don't do proprietary trading. We prefer to push delivery business, which is where a larger percentage of our income comes in, because we believe that only those disciplined delivery investors will make money. We have seen statistics. Unfortunately, most of the people who do day trading, or for most of the people who do F&O, which is a big craze these days, over a period of time, a larger percentage, I don't want to put a number, I don't want to astonish people, a larger percentage, to be safe to say that, loses money. Okay, and this is also coming from this technology-based exposure we have had. Clients, this young client thinks that by attending a week class or a 2-week class, they understand the derivatives market, and they start trading. But of course, actually, you will come to know only after a certain period of time that only buying a call or put doesn't mean that your risk is covered. Yeah, of course, your risk is covered, but you still have to pay the premium for buying call and put. End of the year, how much have you paid for that? So those things are still to evolve. But why should somebody come to us? I mean, we are platform providers apart from the execution services. Why should somebody come to us, or like people like you? So they expect that we should be able to get them better returns than what they would normally get if they do it themselves. Okay? So we will, in terms of surveys, in terms of brick mortar branches, and in terms of advice, that this is the stock you need to buy, this is the stock you need to sell. And if you have bought the stock, this is what you look at in the long term. What we try to tell people is, stock market is not for trading, it is for investments. You invest in stock market with a goal in mind. You have goals, 5-year goal, 10-year goal, 15-year goal. And I'm not talking only about directly secondary market, I'm talking about mutual fund as well. You invest with a goal in mind, and for that, you identify either a mutual fund scheme or a stock. If you are capable enough, if you have understanding, you buy those stocks which you understand. If you are not, you take advice from a reliable intermediary, or you go to professional fund managers like yours and us. If you have a disciplined way of investment, I'm sure people will make money. So that is what even an HNI expects. Of course, an HNI requires a little bit more help other than a retail investor. You sometimes have to go and do the risk profiling. Main thing is asset allocation, how much percentage of his asset is in equities. Sometimes advice on tax planning, estate planning, and all those things. So all those gamut comes under actually a private wealth kind of a department.
Right. Satish, so I completely understand what you say. And I would like to second what you said, that trading doesn't make money, because for a brief period of time I was also there on a trading desk, and I will tell you my number. You hesitated to mention your number. I can understand where you're coming from, but I'm no more associated with broking, so I'll tell you my number. And my number was that 90% of the people who were trading actually lost money. I'm sure your number is close to that number. It can't be very different. Another important thing is that it's really ironical that we, being in the broking business, we tell our customers that don't do this because this is what makes money for us, and yet people still continue to do that. So that's a classic greed and fear thing that we go around. So yeah, thanks for that insight. Vikas, over to you.
Satish, I was listening to you very closely, and I think in one of our earlier discussions, you mentioned a very interesting point about mass wealth firm versus boutique firms. I think probably you may want to elaborate that further, because I found that distinction very, very interesting.
Thanks, Vikas. So, like I said, when you first mentioned brokerage, I said don't mention brokerage. It is investments. The old age, 20, 30 years back, we could have been called brokerage. Now we are no longer a brokerage. We provide all kind of solutions. Financial planning starts with insurance. That is the basic thing which somebody needs before coming to invest. Whether you have insured yourself for the sake of your family. That is the first part. The second comes with asset allocation. What percentage of your asset is into equities? You should not, there is no point putting 1% of your total portfolio into equities. It going up by 3 times doesn't make any difference to your net worth. You should have a proportionate to your risk appetite allocation to equities. Then only you'll make actually the gains which will help you in your future. And the third is advice. These are the 3 things. So what we call ourselves, we are a retail intermediary. We cater to, in a year, we are in contact with close to 400,000 clients. We call ourselves as mass wealth managers. Of course, wealth manager as not as per the SEBI term. SEBI has different definition for SEBI, so I'm not talking in legal terms. So we try to explain to the client how a standardized way of making wealth and investment priorities. So we, like HNIs, you have a wealth management division or private wealth division, so as it's called. You advise clients on different aspects, including international equities. Of course, for retail, on a standardized basis, we don't advise on international equities for retail clients, but we try to bucket them with their risk profile. Okay, this is your risk profile. You could have this much percentage in equities. Whether it is secondary market or primary market is different. This is what you need to have your insurance, etc., etc. So we like to call ourselves trying to provide mass financial. I will not call the word management.
Very interesting. So my next question actually is something which came in from quite a few people who have been tracking the tweets and the social media thing. There are 2 parts to this. First part is that in today's world of complex financial products, you actually mentioned international equity, but I think that is far less complex than what we see around us. People today are bombarded with a lot of information on cryptocurrency and ETFs, different types of ETFs. So as a firm, how do you help your clients create wealth? How do you keep them focused on, you said goal setting, one part of it, yes, but I'm just saying that how do you cut out the noise and create wealth for your clients? That is one part of the question. The second part of the question is, a lot of clients would come to you for creation of wealth through FNO, right? Now, obviously, there is a discussion which just happened that most of the people lose money, but I'm sure that there would be a lot of people coming to you saying that markets look good, I want to make money, tell me. So how do you advise these people? You want their money for FNO, but you don't want them to lose money. So how do you weave that into your entire financial advice? So 2 parts: complex products. How do you make sure that people stay focused on what they're doing rather than getting carried away by the noise? And 2 is products like derivatives. How do you weave them in?
So the first question itself, I'll split into 2 parts, Vikas. So for the mass retail, you don't need complex products. Complex products is required for people who are ultra HNIs, who has the appetite to take complex products. 99% of Indians do not need complex products, actually speaking. They need only a disciplined way of investments. Either they do it themselves through an advice of a intermediary, or they give it to professional fund managers. What they need is discipline, patience, and goal setting. Let us forget asset allocation, which has happened before this discussion has happened. So what you are able to tell your clients is that, of course, we start with history. Like I said in the beginning, when I came to this industry, it was 1,000. Today it is 53,000 Sensex. Without doing anything, if you had bought the 30 good stocks, you would have made 14% return plus the dividends every year. It will be around 1.5-2% plus. You don't need to do anything else. What now people like us have done is, we choose out of this 30 stocks of 100 stocks or 200 stocks. We choose out of this 200, 300 mutual funds. With basis some advice, some study that this could be the best mutual fund, this could be the best stock for you for the next future 1, 3, 4, 5 years. plainly following that with a disciplined investment is enough for the mass retail. People who are able to take much better risk, people who would like to diversify from only this plain vanilla product. These are called ultra HNIs, who has the appetite to do this. We have a different department for that. It doesn't happen through the whole brick and mortar branch staff we have. We have a separate department, like you have a department which manages HNI clients. There we have complex products. We allow investing in international stocks. We allow, it is okay for us to ask people to invest in international mutual funds. Okay, so these are for a particular segment of people who are able to take risk, who wants to diversify their portfolio beyond India. So two separate set of people service them, because it requires a little bit better knowledge in terms of salespeople also to understand these products. To answer the second question, which is very interesting and which is little sensitive for us, F&O trading. As a concept, F&O was for hedging. Okay, because 300, 400 years ago, it started with cotton. So if you have something you want to hedge, you would do a derivatives. The idea was to hedge your existing portfolio. I don't know, in this today's market, less than 1% of the total population would be hedging, using F&O for hedging. Balance uses it for high frequency trading. I will not call gambling because it looks bad. I am not sure how many of them understand the nuances of derivatives trading. I don't think a 1 week, 2 week, or a 1 month class is enough to teach people the nuances of derivatives trading. It is very simple for us to say, you buy a call, your risk is limited. You only lose the premium you have paid. Okay, it's very simple. I see a lot of youngsters coming to us saying that, I trade in F&O, but I don't take any risk. I have bought a Nifty call by paying 100 rupees. I don't have any, I'll lose only 100 rupees, 100 rupees into the 50 market lot, whatever. I said, come back to me after 12 months. How many such calls you have bought? And how do the money you have paid? So people do not understand. I think my personal feeling, F&O, derivatives trading, is only for a certain class of people who understands. Rest of the people, unfortunately, over a longer term, have chances of losing money. So my request to all of you, all of the new age clients would be, don't get into F&O if you do not understand it.
It's actually very interesting, that recommending F&O to an HNI investor for hedging. I think that's as candid as it gets. I remember one of your quotes, which I think you said somewhere, and maybe I read it somewhere. Very interesting, which has stayed with me. कि stock सट्टा नहीं होता है, position सट्टा होता है. Yeah, so I think that works not just for F&O, but it also works for cash investing. Yeah. So stock सट्टा नहीं होता है, position सट्टा होता है. Very interesting one.
See, actually, because I should not be saying this, but still I would like to say this. Greed in any form is harmful.
Yeah.
Greed in any form is harmful. You have a leverage trading in Infosys. Infosys is a very good company, or any other such good scripts. You have a leverage trading, something bad happens, you lose money. You have not lost money because of Infosys. You lost money because of your greed. Okay, so that is, and unfortunately what happens is people lose money because of this reason, and they say the stock market is bad. They go and tell 4 other people the stock market is bad, and the 4 other people who have never invested in stock market feels it is bad. Actually, if you had done the same thing in horse racing or by playing poker, you would have got the same results. So I don't think you should need to generalize when your approach itself was wrong.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Sachin?
Yeah. So, interesting point, Satish, you mentioned about the segmentation of people in terms of the HNI and the mass and what they should be doing. But, again, in the recent times, what we are seeing is a is a new trend, and what I call it something like a IKEA trend. IKEA has come to India. I see a lot of investors also coming into stock markets who are more like DIY, right? They do it yourself, and they're trying a lot of new things on their own. How do you see this trend, and what would be your thoughts to them in terms of how should they be managing things?
Okay, so Sachin, before I answer your question, there are some people. I rarely go to Twitter, but I see on Twitter, I made so much of money. I made so much of money. I don't think I have ever seen that I lost so much of money. Anybody saying that?
Absolutely, yes.
So it makes me feel that 20 million people trading in the stock market, everybody is making money by trading. I don't think that is correct. Most of this new gen people are tech savvy. They are definite followers of Twitter and all those things which Vikas uses. I don't use it. So they feel that they can do it. Yeah, but there are certain segment of people, segment of clients, new age gen clients also, who are able to understand the market and take appropriate decision. But a large percentage, 90-95% plus, I don't think they have reached the stage of do it yourself. But yes, they would like to do it, and I think in life everything should be experimented. Only if you do it, you will know that you are not able to do it, right? So let people trade, let people do it themselves. Over a period of time, they will understand whether they are right or there are expert people in this business whom they should refer to. But this is come and tell me, people come and tell me that okay, I would like to trade because they have heard their neighbors making money. They have heard Vikas Sachdeva saying on Twitter that I made money by trading. So people come and tell me that I would like to trade. First thing is I try to find out what is their experience in trading, how much do they understand either fundamentals or technicals. We try to discourage them, but still yes, they would still like to trade. You tell somebody not to do it, they would first want to do it, then say okay. So what I tell them is, okay, you want to trade, but give me a discipline. You will use maybe 5% or 10% of a portfolio for trading. And if you are able to make money, fine, then you are a better person than what I thought. But if you are losing, if you lose your cap of 10%, don't come to trading, go and do investments. So no matter what we tell our clients that don't do trading, they'll still trade. And some people make money also. There are learned investors, somebody who understands technical analysis. There are some people who make money, and I would like everybody of our clients to make money, but large percentage doesn't. So what I advise them is, you allocate a certain portfolio, certain percentage of a portfolio, there you take risk, you do whatever you want to do. The moment you finish that, you understand which side of the coin you are.
But Satish, in the last 30 years that you've been around, are you seeing this as a new trend that when investors are entering the stock markets, they want to do it themselves? Or earlier, because I believe most of the people would go to a broker, even a neighbor who's a broker, and tell them, what do you think I should do, buy, sell? This is probably for the first time that we are seeing this is where they, it's a DIY generation. Would you agree with that? Or you've seen this in the past too?
My feeling is, Sachin, DIY was there prevalent some time back also. So okay. DIY doesn't mean that you only choose. You actually are speaking to somebody on Twitter. Vikas Sachdeva was actually saying that I made money in XYZ script. Okay. Nobody checks whether Vikas Sachdeva has made that money.
Right.
Okay, so some sort of that was there some years back also. Today, because of technology, that number has largely increased.
Okay.
And you have seen this case in US, how some retail investors have taken one of two of scripts to whatever level they could take. Right. So that is the kind of strength. But advice is, it doesn't happen always.
True. Just a clarification, guys. Vikas Sachdeva never proclaims he made money on Twitter.
Sorry.
I was about to make that comment for all those people in compliance listening to this. I don't trade. I take compliance permission, but it's okay. It's just I was just smiling to myself.
Vikas, let me
Because you don't know, you already got a 1 million followers now because you're making money. Satish has made you more famous.
I make more money because I listen to Satish and Sachin and I invest in his funds. Because I don't trade, I can't trade. Compliance restrictions for us are very, very huge. But I think what Satish is trying to label is a point of people who are trying to use that social media as a platform. Yeah.
Because let me clarify, no, it is not Vikas Debreva, but I have a name there which I cannot tell on this forum.
Sure. That is good. Okay, let's just. I'm going to take a small change of topic. In the sense, Satish, your firm has a very, very strong presence in the Middle East markets, and also a lot of remittances. The largest remittances comes to your state where you are based out of. You're spread across the country, but which is where your foundation or where your HQ is. How do you see these NRI investors? What is their profile? What are their expectations? What are their goals? Are they different from us residents? Can you define this NRI as a customer or an investor?
So, Sachin, when I talk about our clients, most of our NRIs come from the Gulf side of the world. Traditionally, a lot of Malayalis went to Gulf some years back to make money, and so the cult increased, and there are a lot of South Indians there in the Gulf side. So, and we have offices there through our joint ventures in most of the Gulf countries. And there are two segments of clients. One is the mass retail, who sends a certain amount of money every month to his family back in Kerala, and the second, the high-paying jobs in NRIs who are well educated and they have other avenues other than India also. So let me talk about the first portion, which is where the mass retail of NRIs is. Their goals are not largely different from what a normal resident Indian does. First is, of course, they have to buy a place where they have to stay. Second, they want to secure your future. Because the disposable income is better than a normal resident Indian, they are able to invest in markets, whether it is direct stock market or in mutual funds. Thankfully, in spite of the rupee depreciating over the last 2-3 years, they have not affected because 99% of them do not repatriate the money. Okay, so what they have to invest now, they are actually well off. Okay, in terms of, because they don't repatriate. The one segment which is HNI, which invest in Indian market also, but they would like to diversify like our ultra HNI clients, they have exposure in international markets also. So there you have a different set of rules and advice. Okay, so for the larger number of clients, their goals are similar. First is they want a house back in their hometown. They will remit money back to India or Kerala, which will take care of their future. For them, the process remains the same. For the ultra HNI, of course, the process is little different. NRIs are, and primarily from the Gulf, in the last 1-2 years, there has been some impact because of this COVID, because of loss of jobs. There is some impact on the remittance over the last 1 year, but not largely a problem as of now.
Yeah, but I guess with the oil prices coming back, it should revive, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, Vikas, over to you.
Interesting that you mentioned. I think you were talking about NRIs building a house. So I just want to pick that question up. These are last couple of questions before I go to the audience questions there. So for an NRI investor, both the classes which you talked about, people who are quite sophisticated in the knowledge and people who are not. In terms of their allocation between physical and financial assets, do you see a difference? That is part A. And part B is, although you've answered that, but in context of physical and financial, do you see local and international asset diversification?
So when you talk about the mass, I would say that still a larger percentage goes into physical assets.
Okay. In India.
In India, and a smaller percentage to financial assets. Even in financial asset, a larger percentage goes to fixed income like FDs in bank. So my presumption is number would be slightly better than a normal resident Indian who invests maybe 5%. For non-resident Indian, it could be around 8 to 10%. Just a ballpark figure. For those well-informed NRIs, we have seen well-informed NRIs up to 20-25% of their investable surplus can be put in international markets also.
Okay. But when you're saying international markets, there it is usually financial, or they also invest in real estate overseas?
It is primarily financials.
Primarily.
Most of Indians prefer to have a place in their local town rather than anywhere else in the world. Only those sophisticated NRIs who wants to diversify would have investment outside India, and maybe particularly when it helps them to take a visa, in this Gulf places.
Interesting. So I think last question before I lead on to audience questions, maybe one before last. You talked about fixed deposits. I just heard you mention about fixed deposits, and a lot of time we had chatter about NRIs, looking at opportunities where they made money through leveraging and investing in fixed income instruments globally. Do you think that is something which is a sizable part of an NRI's wealth management or money wealth creation process?
Because this happens during certain periods of the industry.
Okay.
If you look at, I think 8-10 years back, we had actual examples where people used to deposit, make an FD in their Gulf bank, take 5 times, 3 times leverage, put that money into Indian FD. The loss in foreign exchange was not much. Net to net, they still made gains. My personal opinion about this, I would prefer, as far as possible, not to be leveraged, because leverage always has a problem of uncertainty. Something wrong happens, the leverage itself, the principal itself can go. This is only for informed investors or investors who have access to good wealth managers. If they are able to do that, it is good. But for the mass, I would always prefer to be non-leveraged, particularly in equity. I will never advise anybody to invest in equities by taking a
leverage. Yes.
It is a very, very wrong thing to do, investing in equity by taking loan funds. It can create chaos.
No, it's probably a shadow way of looking at an FNO trade in a way. You're leveraging on your bets and you're doing that. Sizing is an issue.
It's still slightly different.
Slightly different, I'm saying conceptually.
Slightly different because with FNO you're putting your own money, so it is okay. But if you take a loan and do it, the markets in the short term can do anything.
Yes, you're right.
So it will be a little careful. I will never advise anybody to take a loan and buy equities.
Wonderful. So my last question is actually dovetailing into the audience questions. But before that, Sankalpa, I saw a poll which you ran, in which 91% of the people said that they've not made money in derivatives, right?
There are a lot of polls, so we can discuss them in a while after we've taken the questions. Satish, before we move on, because with your, I just want to ask one question. You said never borrow to buy equities. Okay, but these days, what is happening as a trend is that people borrow against equities. Your LAP or loan against shares. That has become increasingly very popular. Okay, but the caveat here is that your collateral itself will shift its value depending on the market, and it has led to huge margin calls which we have seen across different cycles. There was one in 18, 19, 20 would have probably seen some cycles. So what is your advice on those kind of, that's also an investment product at the end of the day. If you want to dip into your mutual fund and borrow against it, so what will what is your view there?
So again, I'll go back to my old statement. I will advise people not to do it. Okay, but still people would want to do it. So then I will say that, okay, you want to borrow, you borrow up to 10% of your portfolio. Then you keep a stop loss. If this is over, We will not do that. Okay, so ultimately, equity market, nobody can guarantee. Anything can happen in the short term. One fine day something happens. You have seen, particularly in pharma stocks, one FDA audit comes in, the pharma stocks can tank. Normally, what happens is that you have taken loan on a pharma stock to buy a pharma stock. So you have double impact. It is always preferable to use your own money to trade for long term. That is where you make money. In this industry for 30 years, I have seen quite a few people who are active traders who move out of the market in 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, depending upon how good they are. But I have seen many investors over the last 10, 20, 30 years who have been long-term investments, and they are still there in the market.
This is pretty insightful. When you were talking, again, I was smiling to myself because you sounded like when I talk to my son. Beta, drinking is not good for health, but if you still insist on drinking, drink with me. At least I'll control where it goes. So thank you. That was very interesting. So talking about stock markets, a plethora of questions which are coming on the stock market, Satish. And if there is any disclaimer or anything which you would want to do before you answer any of these questions, please feel free to. But most of these are general questions. And I'm just dovetailing into that because the question I had is, why should NRI investors look at Indian markets today, given that international markets have done very well? But whatever, I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in on what is your outlook on Indian markets at current stage?
Okay, because I told you in the beginning, when I came to this market in 1990, index was 1,000. Now it is 53,000, which is 14% CAGR. And it actually blends into the kind of growth India had in terms of nominal GDP over the last 30 odd years. More or less 14% nominal growth and 14% growth in the index. This is index. If you had put in a mutual fund, a high-performing mutual fund, instead of 14, you would have got 18, 20%. If you had the aptitude or research advice from somebody in a good stock, maybe it would have been 20 to 25% also. But let us, for this basis of the discussion, let us limit up to the lowest denominator, which is the Indian economy returns of 14%. India is growing. I feel in the next 10, 15, 20 years, India will still grow at 10% nominal growth. And I feel that kind of returns should be an expectable return in the market.
Can you just repeat that again, please? You're saying what is the expected return?
10 to 12% over the next 10 years. And as and how India becomes a developed country, the rate of the nominal growth rate comes down. Of course, the inflation obviously will come down. You will still make a net return in equities. Compare this with US. If this rule holds good here, I'm sure this rule should hold good in other countries also, where they are growing at 4 or 5% return. So I am very bullish on India. 100% of my equities, and my advice is to all clients like this only, that I believe returns in India would, over a longer term, the next 10, 15 years, be the best, one of the best among all developed countries. You said that there is a trend, last year or a year and a half, NASDAQ gave so much of returns where India has not given that kind of returns. Of course, there are cases, and these aberrations happens once upon a time. What has moved in these indices, particularly technology stocks? If you were, or if I was that inclined that I knew the technology stock was going up in US, I would have found out some such stocks in India which would have gone up by 50-60% over the last 1 year. So there is no dearth of opportunities. If you have the aptitude to study it yourself, or if you have help from a informed, reliable intermediary, you can actually make that kind of return. But when I say something, it is for the larger mass who do not have access to these people. It is better to put in mutual fund. I'm sure over my personal feeling, over a longer period, returns in India would be one of the best.
In fact, I remember a discussion with you sometime back when I countered this by saying that there are industries like robotics and artificial intelligence which you can encash in the US. And you promptly came back and said that that may be the case there. But in India also, you have industries at the nascent stage like specialty chemicals, which you may not be getting to access at this stage anyway. So I think that's a valid argument to look at investing in India. And there is another question. I'm trading on eggshells. This is by Subhankar Chakraborty. I'm trading on eggshells because it is somewhat about my industry as well. It says, I'm an investment advisor and I want to, I encounter this question very often. How effective are complicated financial models and AI strategies in terms of generating returns that beat the regular MS strategies, which are so diversified nowadays? What is the incentive for investing this huge lump sum in relatively complicated instruments? So Satish, before you answer, if I can just talk about it, it is the same perception is reality in the absence of communication. So Shubhankar, I must tell you that, especially the products which Sachin handles, these are all long only. There is no hedging, no derivatives, nothing. We run it in a very different way. That is the reason why we call the alternates business. The portfolios are concentrated, the risk management is more stringent, but the idea is to give better returns over a period of time to savvy investors, more than what mutual funds do. Mutual funds, of course, are the bellwether. I've spent my entire career in mutual funds, so I know what you're talking about. But the word complicated is not necessarily for a large swath of products, which is long only. There are AI strategies which do get into hedging, we do get into leveraging and all of that. I think that is probably what you're referring to, which is where I'll now pass it on to Satish to answer this question.
Vikas, you mentioned that I don't lose my cool. Okay. I don't know how far it is true, but I think it is true. You know why? Because I don't get into complicated products. Something which I don't understand, I don't advise. For that, I rely on people like you who run this private wealth, who have well-informed research team and all those people who can advise. If you have somebody good advisor like you people, or you can come to Geojit also. We also have a division like that. So I will not let you alone take that cream. Only those people. Also, I would always prefer that as a client, I would understand I will invest only after understanding the risk involved.
Understood.
I am a simple man. I don't understand. If I don't understand, I will not invest in complex products, period.
I think you're right. I think being simple is the most complex thing, like they say, right? So I think this is very well put. And just for everybody's this thing that if Satish asks me a question, I will tell him personally, not on Twitter. Okay, that's a right away. Now, Archit Maria has been asking questions. So I think this is a question for both you and you, Satish, and Sachin, if you'd like to chip in. The whole idea, the whole question which Archit is asking me again and again through different points of view is view on the banking sector. He's also asked me about some stocks in banking, but I would rather give, for the sake of the audience, view from both of you on the banking sector. This is probably the only sectoral question which has come into me so far. And it's coming to me quite a few times, so I think people are keen to know. Satish, Sachin, over to you.
Sorry, I will not get into sector-wise. I don't know. We have a huge compliance issue, so I will not reply on stocks. I really don't understand these things. I give this question to people more informed, more educated than me. I think Sachin will be better placed to answer this.
Satish, I wouldn't say that I'm more educated or more informed, but it's my job to say, so I'm going to say this.
Yeah, but so let's just point out a very blunt disclaimer that this is for educational purpose, which let's take care of all our compliances. This is more educative than advisory. So please do consult your financial advisor before taking any actionables. Over to you, Sachin.
And Sachin does not advise this even on Twitter. He has a Twitter handle. He doesn't advise that. So you have to log in here and find out. Sachin, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. So, banking as a space is clearly a very, very high potential as far as growth is concerned. Simply because, banking is the backbone of any economy. And as Satish mentioned earlier also, that if we are positive on the Indian economy and the Indian stock market respect the most where there is growth, Indian economy is all about growth. So banking as a sector will definitely do very, very good. And another very important thing is in terms of the penetration. Today, you look at any products. Satish mentioned about the broking penetration, but even if you look at the housing loan kind of penetration, if you look at the auto loans, if you look at personal loans, the kind of the SME sector that we are going to see, that's going to actually explode. I use the word explode in the next 10 years. And so from all of that perspective, I think the opportunity is really, really large. The other very important thing is that the banks have really evolved. Some of the large banks have become one of the most tech-savvy companies. I think they are actually becoming more technology companies because as far as banking is concerned, they've got everything in place. They have been doing this for donkey years. They've got their disciplines, they've got the risk managements, all of that absolutely in place. It's now just about go to market in the most efficient way, reaching out to the right set of customers, and they're actually I would say ruthlessly using technology to achieve these goals. So from that perspective, we strongly believe that banking as a sector will do very, very well over the next 5 to 10 years. Of course, there are a few trends there. For example, we saw that in the last 10 years, the private sector has gained humongous amount of market share over the public sector. Again, within all the players, the top 5 or top 10 players have actually gained even more market share compared to the other players. So I think the important thing here is to figure out some of these trends going forward, and we strongly believe that probably the large will get even larger and stronger in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you, Sachin. There is an observation and there's a counter observation which is coming to your comment on derivatives, Satish. Kashyap Javeri mentions that is there anything wrong in recommending HNIs to hedge via FNO? Bill Ackman didn't sell any shares during COVID-19 pandemic, but made a lot of money spending 27 million buying option in March 2020. Okay, so, and the counterpoint to this from a very different space, very, very different space, is Subhankar Chakrabarty, who says that I can share the result of my experiment in trading in FNO when I used to be an engineer by profession. First 2 weeks I made 20,000 odd, and then the following Monday I lost 15,000 odd. Then I realized the difference between trading and investing and started my investment journey in April 2008. Now I'm an investment advisor. So I think the observation here is something which I learned from the late Parag Parikh, and that got reinforced in my stint during mutual funds as well. It says like investing, when you're investing in stocks, you should always know that it's like you're dealing in fire. Fire can actually cook food for you if it is handled well, or it can burn your house down if you take too many liberties with it. So I think the statement is there. If you know how to handle things, if you're very well aware of the risk, you're very knowledgeable, yes, you can very well be the 1% of the people who make money. But for a large swath of people, I don't think that holds water. So I thought this was a very interesting observation. In fact, Satish, Lalit V has asked whether he can be a client of yours. So Lalit, you could just write into PMS AIF World or us, and we will forward your query to Geojit. I don't know whether you would like to answer this last question, Satish. Is your view on this whole incident of delisting of shares and people starting to take tax shelter, DHFL, Videocon, Lakshmi Vilas Bank? Would you like to comment on that? That is a question which has come in from Varun Prasad.
So it will be a general answer. I will not talk about specific scripts. Hindsight, it looks like it was a wrong decision to buy these kind of shares. If you made a wrong decision in life, you have to pay for it. If a regulator provides some way out, yes, be happy and take it. Otherwise, you make a wrong decision, you pay for it. So that is why you say don't put all your eggs in one basket. So whenever you do, when you have to do a portfolio allocation, after the asset allocation, you invest only a certain percentage of an asset in one stock. And it's good possible that your decision goes wrong. There is nothing wrong in it. Generally, when I speak about portfolio, if you have 10 stocks, couple of stocks will not do well. 5 or 6 stocks will do according to the indices, and 2 stocks will be multi-baggers. That is how you make your return. So there could be one wrong decisions in your portfolio, and you have to bear it. You buy 10 stocks. Nobody in this world can say that 10 out of the 10 is multi-bagger. It never happens like that. So once wrong decision you made, you learn. Next time, don't try to make that same mistake.
Very true. So before I hand it over back to Sankalpa, I think two things. We have to announce the best question, and I think the question which made me chip in and step in because of the sharpness and the candidness of the question was Subhankar Chakravarti talking about PMS in AIF and how it is differentiated, how it's complicated. Satish, if it's okay with you, I think we can award him the best prize. Although I loved Kashyap's observation, but unfortunately it was an observation, it was not a question. Otherwise, if it was framed as a question, I would have probably considered that. Subhankar, congratulations. And Sankalpa, there's a compliment for you and the PMS AIF World team. They said that Rahul Chadda, who's one of our most regular viewers, I said he just loved the way we managed the technical glitch. Yeah.
Thank you, Chaddaji. I hope few of them occur.
Over to you, Sankalpa.
So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in today. I think this was a very informative session. And thank you, Satish. I think, it is very rare that we get someone of your wisdom and vintage coming here and talking to us about, investing and trading also so candidly. So I thank you from the team at PMS AIF World. To the audience, we are ever so grateful for your continuous support and your patronage to us. I hope you subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website and look at all the amazing work we have done. We also invite you all to our mid-year event which is scheduled on the 9th and 10th of July. This is going to be a unique format where fund managers ask real questions to fund managers. It's going to be an exciting journey. Thank you, Vikas. Thank you, Sachin. You've gotten your you've added much flavor to this interaction today, and I think from your collective wisdom, our audiences also get a lot of their questions, their perspectives cleared. So thank you, everybody. We hope to meet soon. I wish everybody a very healthy healthy monsoon, and everybody stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Satish. Thank you, Sankalpo. Thank you, Vikas.
Thank you, Vikas.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Have a
Thanks,
nice evening. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.